Hello gamers, welcome to Games with Dave. Today we are joined by none other than prolific reviewer and author Thilo and Zeitgeist Graf, and another author from AAW Games, Stephen Yeardley. Thilo and Stephen have both worked on Occult Secrets of the Underworld, as well as Underworld Races and Classes from AAW Games, and Stephen also worked on Rise of the Drow and Snow White. Today we'll be discussing the upcoming Kickstarter from AAW Games, the 5e Compatible Survivalist Guide to Spelunking. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen. I'm thrilled to have you today.
Hi there, Dave. Nice to see you.
As a bit of an icebreaker, Thilo, I screwed up your name initially.
Yeah, no problem. It's a challenge rating 30 linguistic trap, so no problem.
So how excited are the two of you for the launch of the Survivalist Guide to Spelunking in 3 days on March the 3rd?
Oh, I can't even tell you how excited I am to get this book into the hands of the gaming public. Seriously, I think it's probably the best thing I've ever written. So, yeah.
It's great to see something that is so carefully thought through as well. There's been a lot of work gone into the background of it, pulling ideas and thoughts together. And well, as you'll find out as we go through this, there's a lot that's going to grab people's attention in there. So it's very exciting to see it out there.
Well, I can't wait personally. Now, when did the two of you begin work on the Survivalist Guide to Spelunking? I noticed the July 2021 fulfillment date, and it really made me say, wow. And I'm sure it's going to have the same effect for others. I mean, that's quite the turnaround time.
Oh boy, I think we started work on it in 2018 or something like that. Towards the
That's
end
about
of 2018.
Yep, that's about the strength of it. When the ideas first came out, that we'd like to have a good look at what it really means to be in the underworld on the back of Rise of the Drow, what it really means to be under the ground.
Oh.
And how many pages will the book contain before stretch goals?
Well, it'll be around 200 pages, give or take a few, of course.
So about on par with Underworld classes or races and classes size-wise?
I think it's slightly larger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually we had the interesting problem with anything like this is that we had at one stage, what do we have? 280, 290 pages. And
Yeah.
so, better to have too many than too few. So we've got around about that 200 is good quality stuff. It's a lot of ideas distilled down into a pretty pure form, rather than just a bit of flap here, a bit of fluff there. There's a lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah, we cut essentially anything that didn't get the people totally pumped up when they read it. So.
Well, I can't wait. So what are some of the stretch goals that you guys can talk about today?
That's over to you, my friend.
Okay, so regarding the stretch goals, we can say that we'll have a ton of really cool little comic strips by Matesh Larentiu, so the main artist for AAW Games currently. And we also have several very important and very cool secrets lined up. One of the things that you mentioned to me, Dave, was that you'd be excited for something akin to what we presented in Underworld Races and Classes and Occult Secrets of the Underworld. Well, I can't be precise, but I can say that we listen to what the people tell us, and your feedback was taken into account. And that's all I can say right now, unfortunately.
All right. So you mentioned, I'm sorry, I'm going to screw his name up, Mateus, for the artist. Matess, who are some of the other artists we can expect to see work from in the Survivalist Guide to Spelunking?
Well, the cover was drawn by a French artist named Ian Lux, and I think you've seen it, and I absolutely think it is mind-blowing. It is absolutely gorgeous. It is probably my favorite cover artwork from AAW Games, and one of my favorite cover artworks beyond that. I actually think about using it as my desktop. So that's something I usually don't do, but this one, wow.
Yeah, it is a beautiful cover. Jonathan shared some of the images with me, and I was just like, wow.
Yeah.
And with Matesh, with Larry, as he calls himself generally, he's been able to flex his artistic muscles in different directions. So yeah, he's been given an opportunity to have completely different art, and you will look at what's in the book eventually, and you wouldn't necessarily know that they're by the same guy. He's worked really hard to get across different elements for us in different ways. Some of it is quite old school in its appearance. Some of it harks back to Thilo talking about the stretch goals for the cartoons. If you go back to, I think it was one of the very first player's handbooks that had a series of ongoing cartoons at the bottom as this party worked their way through the underworld and came across kobolds and then trolls and Umber Hulk and so on. And yeah, there's some interesting art in there for sure.
Well, I can't wait to see it for one. So, well, let's get into the meat and potatoes. What are some of the tools, tables, and rules we can expect to see in the Survivalist Guide to Spelunking?
Oh boy. So that is the main meat of the book. And that's what I'm personally most excited about. Because the design goal that Stephen and I hashed out was essentially, okay, we want this book to retain its relevance beyond the confines of 5e. It's written for 5e, 100%. But a lot of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to give gamers tools to play modules that the regular systems usually don't allow them to do. So what we have is a pretty simple and elegant momentum engine that comes in two different shapes that work pretty similar to each other, but have different tiers of complexity. Why? Because, well, some people play 5e more like a combat simulator with a lot of tactical options and nuances, right? And others play it more like a variant of an old school game. And we wanted to present something that works for both of these groups. We have, based on that, a maneuver engine, a spell casting engine. We have foraging, hunting, and we have tons of tables for wondrous regions in the underworld. So if you wanted to explore the frozen crystalline landscape of the colloid, or subterranean shores, or the regions adjacent to hell, well, we cover all of that. And yeah, it's pretty awesome.
It sounds pretty awesome. It's got me very excited. So
We also we looked at what is out in the real world, and I think sometimes what it means to be underground. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been somewhere that is truly underground and truly dark and truly disassociated with the surface, but it's just different. And you get to places where there is no light, where there is no sound. A few years ago, I used to LARP in a place called Chislehurst Caves in England, and it was, there are many miles of caves, and a company took over a section of them. And when you're in those caves, if they turn the lights out, there was nothing, and it's just a different feeling. So we looked at, Thilo thought about this. I threw lots of ideas at him, and he thought about all these engines, about what it really means to be in the dark, to be in the cold, to be in, and to have no food, to have no water, all these different things. And you've really made those rules pop, haven't you, Thilo? You've really pulled engines together. It's a different feel, a different environment.
So one of the things that we wanted to do on a rules design level was we wanted all of those engines to be modular and easy to expand. So if you, for example, say, okay, we're in the darkness and we want to play this very, very detailed take on light and darkness and stuff like that, then you can do that, but you don't have to. Similar thing is, okay, we want to do some foraging right now. You can do that divorced from all of the other rules in the book. So it's super modular, it's super easy to expand. And since Stephen mentioned the whole darkness angle, actually he's selling himself short, because Stephen had this absolutely brilliant idea of how darkness could operate in a fantasy setting, and how darkness could be more meaningful. And the interesting thing is, he did not just rehash the standard Soulsborne dark versus fire stuff or anything like that, but he created this very unique take on darkness, and I absolutely love it. It's I think one of my favorite parts in the book that Stephen wrote.
Yes, you're very kind, Thilo. But it's that combination of ideas and rules, though. The ideas wouldn't work if there weren't rules. If the way the engine drives, just to give a hint, darkness is no longer lowercase d. Darkness is now uppercase D. And man, that gives you a lot to play with. It is something. It's no longer nothing. And I don't know how many of your listeners are that interested in dark matter taking up 95% of the universe, but it does something and it affects us all the time. So in game, you get a lot of leeway to say, well, it can do this, it might do that. It's got an aim and objective of its own. It is physical. It is obeying its own physics. And Thilo's drawn all those rules out from that, because there's a lot in 5e that you can bend and flex, and it still makes perfect sense within the game, within the rules.
All right, that sounds almost horrifying to think of the impact that darkness is going to be able to have on people's games now.
Oh,
Yeah.
you wait until the first people dive down into the lightless abyss.
Yeah.
It aims back at you.
Yes, that's the thing. It's there. It's waiting for you, and it's calling to you. I'm giving too much away now. Sorry.
No. So speaking of the engines, what can you tell me about the momentum engine that you designed, Thilo?
Okay, so the momentum engine was essentially me thinking about the feedback I received from Underworld Races and Classes and Occult Secrets of the Underworld. And that feedback was that people really enjoyed it when a character class or a class option or something like that allowed them to have different actions and different strategies at their at their beck and call, even at low levels, right? Because usually that's one of the things that some fans of 5e don't like too much, that they're saying, okay, the first 3 levels or something like that, we don't have that many different options. And I figured, okay, what am I going to do? And I also like it when combats are dynamic, right?
Yep.
So the antithesis of, for example, what we had in 3.5, where people just stand next to each other and bash each other with full attacks, right? I mean, personally, I was never the biggest fan of that. And 5e does that really well, but it doesn't really reward people for using their movement in a tactical way in combat, right?
You're
And
right there.
And so I wrote the momentum engine as a means to reward players for moving around the battlefield. You know, you move, you gather momentum, and then, for example, even a level 1 character can generate some sort of special maneuver with an attack that, for example, lets them disable a shield or a weapon or something like that, or perform a better disarm than they usually would with the variant rules in the DMG. And this is obviously also interesting because it makes, for example, being mounted, being on a vessel or something like that matter, because then you can, if you want to, you don't have to, track, for example, the speed of the vessel and get bonuses when you jump off of it and stuff like that. So it makes combat much more dynamic, and it ties in with a whole slew of other options. The consequence of the whole momentum engine is that if you use the maneuvers, you could theoretically design, for example, Final Fantasy style bosses with multiple appendages that characters have to keep disabled and stuff like that. So you can use this engine to make puzzle encounters if you want. You don't have to, but you can. And that's what this book is all about. It's about giving DMs the choices to make new stuff that they couldn't before.
Excellent.
If you can imagine the most exciting films that you see where fight scenes are truly mobile. I mean, I can still remember the first time I saw the articulated lorries, the articulated trucks in Terminator 2, I think it is, where they're hurtling along. And those rules allow you to play that sort of game. You know, the bigger vehicles with people doing things on them and in them, but they've got speed, momentum themselves, and you gain from that, you lose from that, and in a way that perhaps games haven't dealt with that sort of thing. And yet they're exciting fights, they're exciting chases, and the engine definitely does something like that. Allows you to work with it to have a whole load of elements interacting in a way that I can't recall seeing before ever. So, hey, that's a good thing.
That sounds like a good thing.
If I may for a second, we also have an optional way to tie that into spell casting, because I also use this engine as a variant to allow players, if they wanted to, engage in a kind of segmented, more tactical spell casting. So that one would also keep lower level spells relevant at higher levels, which is, I think kind of neat. And as Stephen just mentioned, do you happen to know the second Judge D movie? There's this huge scene in the end where everyone is fighting tied to ropes on this huge cliff wall, and there is all this wuxia shenanigans going on, and it is absolutely fantastic. It was one of the coolest fight scenes I'd ever seen, and I thought, okay, I want to play this. Oh damn, in none of the role-playing games I know, and I know a lot of them, there are actual rules to play this sort of scenario, and that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to write those momentum rules.
I also gave Thilo a bit of a challenge in one of the things I wanted to make sure was in the book. It's not a huge section. It's just there. Is that people don't necessarily know what it's like to fall, and in the underworld it's 3-dimensional. There's a lot of chance of falling, and it's amazing how far you can fall in 30 seconds. You can fall a mile in 30 seconds if there it is, a handful of rounds, and you've dropped a mile. Kind of makes sense when Gandalf throwing himself off with a Balrog. They fall huge distance long way, but that gives you momentum. And one of the challenges I gave to Thilo was, how do you describe that? How do people then throw themselves off a cliff or into a tunnel or into a purple wormhole or something, and what can they do in the 6 seconds it takes them to fall 600 feet? Can do a lot, and Thilo's built all of that in a way that I hadn't seen before, and I think it's a great system.
It sounds like it. So, what do you think will excite GMs the most and horrify players the most with this book?
I'm going to do some fluff with the horrify first. So the darkness is definitely something when you get to it. I promise you, the way it's described and the way that we let GMs run with it is great. I also like. I'm going to talk about the fluff here, if you don't mind, Thilo. The interaction of the material plane with the elemental planes. We've had a look again at some real world activity, and Thilo's got some great rules around that. But I don't know if you're familiar with the undersea phenomenon of black smokers and white smokers, which are points where intense amounts of heat from lava meet the water and meet the sea, and they're producing superheated air in amongst blowing sand. It's so hot the sand is turned into glass in some cases. So you actually have earth, air, fire, and water all interacting at one point. And I thought to myself that, even in game, that's the four elements fighting for dominance. Not just existing. It's not just a fire elemental saying, "Hey, look, I'm hot. I'm in a bonfire," or a water elemental saying, "This underground pool is fantastic." The elements are fighting for control at single points, and I think that's pretty scary for players when they walk in somewhere and the temperature increases tenfold, or the pressure from water increases tenfold, or whatever, and they're going to find some pretty scary environments. Not just the idea of them, real rules for them. This is how it works. This is what's going to get worse, guys. You want to go forward another 10 feet, another 100 feet? Prepared. And it's going to be pretty scary when people realize what's actually going to happen to them when they walk into a natural environment. I think they're pretty scary facts.
That sounds scary.
Yeah. One of the things that I think GMs will have a blast with is one of the new conditions I wrote for the book, which is shroomitis. And shroomitis is essentially volatile spores colonizing the body of sentient beings, and those spores, they will start to slowly take you over, and they want to spread. So once you're infected and have progressed to a certain stage in the condition, you have this unfortunate tendency of exuding spores yourself. And
Yeah.
since it's plant life and since it's shrooms, well, if you add positive energy and the forces of life to that whole thing, it might actually make the thing worse because it'll power the shrooms and the infection. So that one will be something that really, puts players on their edge. Another thing that I really liked is a small bit. In one of the regions we introduce in the book, the region is kind of sentient. And it has this option to create hard light phantoms. And hard light phantoms are essentially my carte blanche to the GM to introduce pretty much any creature they want. Because this region tends to assimilate individuals and creatures, and after that it can generate them as hard light phantoms. So if you're one of the GMs like I am, who has at this point probably something like 50 or so creature books and monster manuals lying around, this will be a perfect means for a very easy change of pace if you just want to add that in, and it'll still make sense within the reality of the game. So I think that's a small thing, and it's a thing that we could have easily cut from the book, but I'm really glad we didn't, because I really like it.
That sounds fun.
I think the players will be excited by what they are allowed to do by the book. I mean, Thilo's talked very eloquently there about the momentum engine, but I think you're selling yourself short here, Thilo, because there are a number of ideas which just allow players to be expansive, to introduce, although they're rules, introduce more story elements to their characters. What, you know, my character is heading down this path. My character genuinely enjoys this sort of thing. Maybe you've got a group of players who want to have something that becomes a real survivalist adventure. You know, they want the adventure, they want the background, they want where they're going to be as much part of the thrill and the challenge, as opposed to the standing there hitting something with a sword. You know, there's a lot going on that means players can really get down and dirty with the world that they're in. Not that, you know, they will have to do more than just exist in it if they want to. They will need to live in it. They'll need to thrive in it. They'll need to get in there and get their hands dirty, which is, you know, a great way of playing the game at times. Not all the time, but, you know, at times it just offers a different function. What does it mean to travel across that hex? Does it mean, oh, you enter one side of the hex and I'm going to, as GM, do nothing more than say, you reach the other side of the hex? Fantastic. Not anymore. Not anymore. There's a lot going on. It brings a world to life, I think. Yeah, definitely. Thilo's drawn that out from these rules and guidelines. Guidelines as well. We talk about rules, but they're strong guidelines. You can flex and bend them. You know, they're not rigid. They're there to use as rights for your game.
Yeah. And there's the other way around as well. So if you're a GM and you think, okay, in this module, I don't want to go into the detail of exploring hex A, B, and C. Then I've got some streamlined rules where basically the party just walks through those hexes. However, those hexes do take their toll on them. And they'll either take damage or consume some of their resources to represent the journey. So either you can streamline everything and run through it, or you can role play the exploration properly, or you can alternate between those, just however you want. So once more, the modularity aspect of the rules is super important. Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
So what is it that both of you think has drawn so many players and GMs alike into the underworld over all the different iterations of Dungeons and Dragons?
I think it is because so few of us actually appreciate what it's like to be underground, similar to what I was saying at the beginning. Very few of us spend much, if any, time in caves of any sort. Very few of us experience the, I guess, the fear of being somewhere with your torch, with your head torch, that suddenly the battery goes out and you think, oh dear, here I am. Or you're moving forward and suddenly you realize you probably shouldn't have had that extra donut at the start of the journey because the cave you're going through is a bit narrower than you anticipated. I think it's not knowing what's down there. Yeah, you go underground and you lose all reference. You're not coming across things that you know about, full of creatures you don't like, perhaps. Maybe you're not a fan of spiders or bugs or bats or things that come at you silently and disappear before you know they're there. And you know, it's a different environment. And I think that's what draws us in. It's a bit like fairy tales, isn't it? They're there with their story of their own and they draw you in.
Yeah, well, personally, I actually thought about this less from the fairy tale standpoint, but rather from the just plain scientific one. I mean, the cenotes and cave systems in our own very world, much like the bottom of the sea, is one of the last frontiers that we have. It's something that is realistic to us because we know it exists, but it's not something that we know too much about. We probably know pictures. I mean, I went cenote diving once, and we have some huge caverns and caves where I live. But as a whole, we know about these things without really knowing them, and that makes them really fertile ground for the imagination. And it scratches that exploration itch, that westward ho mentality.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, we know which mountain on the surface is the highest mountain. We know where the deepest trench is. We know where the biggest sea is. We know where, we know the surface reasonably well. We don't know what the biggest cave system in the world is. We've got an idea, the Mammoth Cave system in Kentucky and Fisher Ridge. They're two of the longest cave systems, but they're actually only a few 100 feet apart. So, yeah, there's going to be a link between them somewhere, but we don't know it yet. We don't know what the deepest hole is. We don't know where we got an idea where hottest temperatures are. There's a lot, as Thilo says, that we're aware of. We know we don't know the actual answers, and that's what takes us in the game, I think. The sky is what? A mile, 2 miles above us. The center of the earth is thousands of miles below us. There's a lot more to discover under the ground than there is above it.
There certainly is. And for both of you, what were some lessons you were able to take from writing occult classes of the underworld, underworld races, and Rise of the Drow? And how did you apply them to the Survivalist Guide to Spelunking?
Well, for me personally, the positive feedback I got for Underworld races and classes, and particularly Occult Secrets of the Underworld, where Jonathan really unshackled me and allowed me to design absolutely 100% what I wanted to do, was that there are different play styles for 5e, and that there is this unified or mostly unified notion of that options and complexity can be good, provided you allow for the modularity. One of the most important things for me personally, when designing all of that stuff, was to allow GMs to, for example, scale down the power of the races, or to run some unique concepts. And beyond that, also, as in all of my writing, there is a lot of little lore hints. So if you've read Occult Secrets of the Underworld and Underworld Races and Classes, you will find some nods and secrets and Easter eggs in the new book, obviously, but the Survivalist Guide to Spelunking does not require Underworld Races and Classes, Occult Secrets of the Underworld, or Rise of the Drow Collector's Edition. It's its own standalone beast.
Okay.
Definitely. I'd say from going Rise of the Drow and Snow White to a great extent, taking into this is that you almost, the elements I was doing, you don't have to make them up, which sounds really odd for fantasy gaming, but you do not have to make them up. There's enough out there that is just quite jaw-dropping. I think with Rise of the Drow, the long sections I wrote, they're real. Again, I know that sounds odd, but they're based on facts. You could go out and you can find something like them in the real world. It's out there if you look, or elements of deep space and so on. And I think with Survivalist Guide, it's there. People will read it. It's there to be something that makes you think about if you were doing this for real. Have you got enough food? Have you got enough water? Have you got light? Have you got the right equipment for this? But it just draws you in. And that idea of taking something that is almost potentially useful as a pocket guide if you're going caving for real. I wouldn't recommend that, by the way. I wouldn't recommend to any listeners that you actually use Survivalist Guide to Spelunking for real caving. But it's that idea. You don't have to make it all up. There's plenty to discover, plenty to write about, and turn into great gaming material.
However, lest the listeners and other people think that it's essentially just an adaptation. No, Stephen is selling himself short. Essentially, what he takes is he takes real world concepts and extrapolates from them. He adds in that fantastic, that magical element and goes from there. But due to this scientific real world background, things feel more real, feel more concise, make more sense. At least that's how they worked for me. So
Yeah, it's definitely what we're aiming for between. So that great mix, the roast potato mix, fluffy center, good crunch on the surface. I think we've got a winner here.
Yeah.
It certainly sounds like it. Well, I have one last thing, and then I'll let you two gentlemen add anything in that you'd like. But one thing that I saw was someone had commented on a post regarding the Survivalist Guide to Spelunking that Spelunking is DM speak for come into my underground lair full of confined spaces and darkness where I can kill your party at my leisure. How accurate do you feel that that is?
Oh boy.
Of course it can be. It can be, but that's part of the fear. It's not a reflection of the book. I can promise you. There's much more going on, but it is part of the fear. Who wants to be trapped in their own coffin? Nobody.
No.
But it's there's a lot going on. If you want to take elements from the book, that's how your group plays, that constant threat, it's there. If you want to explore and uncover the fantastic and interact with it in a real and meaningful way through the engines, that's there as well. If you want to travel, if you want to go on 100-mile journey, that's there as well. If you want to have if you're chasing something, if you want to have an exciting chase, whether it be short term over a couple of 100 yards, or whether you're tracking something with all that's involved over a month, it's all there. It's not just about being, giving GMs a very big hammer to crush the opposition with. It's not at all. It's not about them and us. It's about gaming groups, GMs, players alike, having a great time thinking outside the box that exists within 5E's rules at the moment.
Yeah, if I may add for a second, of course, if you want to play an ultra hardcore edition of 5E, where survival is really brutal, extremely hard, if that's how your group rolls, you'll have the tools. We, for example, have these huge underworld hazard generators, right? And they come in different difficulties and difficulty settings. And so we present these modular values and roles, and you can mix and match and combine them however you want. So that is also part of the appeal. You can make the underworld all about the wonder and looking at everything and experiencing that, and run it in a regular kind of way. You can make it an ultra hardcore experience, and anything in between. It's all about the modularity in this instance.
All right. Well, that was all I had. Is there anything either of you would like to add that we didn't touch on?
Actually, I do, because that's probably one of the things that I'm most proud of when it comes to this book. My goal with it was to give GMs the tools to run new types of adventures. And one of the goals that this book accomplishes is one near and dear to my heart. You probably know about this trope in fantasy and science fiction as well, about going to places no one has before. For example, Conan stumbles through the desert where hundreds of other people have died, and then reaches this fabled city or Hyperborean enclave in the icy tundra where everyone else dies. And that sort of exploration actually is now possible as an adventure with the rules in this book. You can run a survival-based epic, or one where you build a base and then expand from this base and explore more and more and more of the underworld, and the higher your level will be, the farther you can go before your own body's resources give out and you have to retreat back to civilization. You can run that sort of thing. You can run a Caravan or Exodus game like the Banner Saga role-playing games on the PC, and so on. So this book is about allowing us to create new adventures and allowing GMs to create new adventures and run new types of games.
Well, I'd second that entirely. I'm right behind Thilo with that. It's exactly what the book is doing. Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me today, guys.
Thank you, Dave.
Again, the Survivalist Guide to Spelunking launches this Wednesday, March 3rd at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and noon Eastern Standard Time. So be sure you get out there and back it. And would you guys like to tell folks where they can find you online?
Well, you can find me on AAW Games Discord, and if you want to check out my reviews, you can find them on endzeitgeist.com. Yep.
All right.
Yeah. The AAW Discord's a good place for me. A lot of good conversations going on there that Thilo and I and Jonathan and other members of the team contribute to as we go along. So yeah, that's the place to find us. Ask us questions.
All right. Well, thank you again, gentlemen. And
thank you, Dave. That's great.
Best of luck with the Kickstarter, and I'm sure it's going to do well. It sounds like a mix of fun and horrifying at the same time.
Maybe we can come back and talk to you about it when it's launched and people have got it in their hands. If you have experience of it, if you're interested, maybe we can do that.
Absolutely. I would love to have the both of you back. So that would be an honor.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks very much indeed. You take care. Have a great afternoon and evening.
You as well. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
See you later.
All right.